Welcome to Slightly Another Story. History is usually told as a straight line, but small changes can bend it in unexpected ways. This time, we follow one of those bends. The beast that was destined to break free. What happens when the creature destined to end the world never escapes? In the myths of the North, the end was never a question of if, only when. Ragnarok was written into the bones of the cosmos, a final unmaking where fire would swallow sky, oceans would rise, and even the gods would fall. The Norns had spoken. Fate, unyielding, circular, absolute, would claim all things. And the gods knew it. They feasted in Valhalla with the knowledge of their own deaths. Among the many signs of this ending, none inspired more fear than the birth of Fenrir, the monstrous wolf, son of Loki. Even as a cub, he grew too fast. Too strong. His eyes carried hunger not for flesh, but for destiny itself. The prophecies were clear: Fenrir would one day devour Odin, and with that bite, the old world would collapse. The gods did what gods always do when faced with fate. They tried to outweed it. At first, they brought Fenrir into their halls, pretending trust. They fed him. Watched him. Measured his growth with unease. When his strength surpassed even Thor's confidence, they forged chains, thick, iron bonds meant to hold mountains. Fenrir snapped them like thread. Each failure tightened the prophecy's grip. Finally, the gods turned to magic older than force. They commissioned the dwarves to forge Gleipnir, a ribbon light as silk, woven from impossible things: the sound of a cat's footstep, a woman's beard, the breath of fish, the roots of mountains. Fenrir sensed the lie immediately. He would only allow the binding if one god placed a hand in his jaws as a pledge of honesty. Only Tyr stepped forward. When the ribbon tightened and Fenrir realized he had been deceived, his jaws closed. Tyr's hand was lost, and fate moved one step closer to fulfillment. In the known myth, this is only a delay. Fenrir is bound until Ragnarok. And when the end comes, the world burns. The wolf's chains snap. He runs free beneath a shattered sky. Odin falls to his teeth. The old order dies so that a new one may rise. Ragnarok is not evil. It is renewal through destruction. A cycle even gods cannot escape. Or so the stories say. But myths, like fate, often hinge on a single moment. A single failure. A single chain doing what it was never meant to do. Now imagine the fires of Ragnarok beginning to rise. The gods march toward their final battle. The earth trembles. The sky splits. Fenrir strains against his bonds. He howls. He pulls. The world holds its breath. But this time, the chains do not break. Ragnarok without the wolf. What happens to the end of the world when one of its monsters never arrives? Ragnarok begins exactly as foretold. The sky darkens. Stars vanish. The sun is swallowed. Seas rise and spill over their shores, drowning the edges of Midgard. From the east, giants march. From the north, cold and fire collide. The realms tremble as if they recognize what this moment is supposed to be. But somewhere deep beneath the roots of the world, something does not happen. Fenrir pulls against Gleipnir, and the ribbon holds. The wolf howls. The sound shakes stone and soul alike. Yet the chains do not snap. The beast does not run. The jaws that were meant to end the Allfather remain clenched in frustration, not destiny. And for the first time since the Norns wove the world, a prophecy stutters. Unaware of this fracture, Odin rides toward the battlefield of Vrr as he always believed he would. He wears his armor not for survival, but for sacrifice. He expects the wolf. He expects death. He expects the old order to end with his last breath. But the wolf never comes. The clash begins, gods against giants, order against annihilation. Thunder splits the sky as Thor meets his foes. Blades sing. Fire spreads. The world burns because it must. Yet Odin fights on. Minutes pass where none were meant to exist. He strikes down enemies that, in every telling, should have outlived him. He searches the battlefield for the open jaws of fate, and finds only smoke and confusion. Across the chaos, Tyr feels it too. The vengeance promised for his lost hand does not arrive. The balance that once made his sacrifice meaningful tilts into something unfinished. Even loss feels misplaced. And watching it all unfold with a smile that slowly fades is Loki. He was meant to see his son unchained, the final insult to the gods he despised. Instead, he sees hesitation spread like rot through certainty. This was not how the story was written. Among the gods of Asgard, the realization dawns with quiet horror. Ragnarok is still happening. The fires still spread. The dead still fall. But the script is broken. Without Fenrir, the giants advance without their most terrifying ally. The gods fight without the clarity of foretold sacrifice. Chaos no longer comes from destruction alone, but from uncertainty. Each blow lands without knowing whether it is necessary or already obsolete. This is not victory. It is something far more dangerous. Because if one prophecy fails, others may follow. If fate can hesitate, it may be rewritten. When the dust briefly clears, Odin stands alive on a battlefield where he was meant to die. And for the first time in existence, the Allfather must face a future that was never supposed to exist, and decide what a god does when destiny lets go. Power after fate breaks. What happens to authority when fate no longer guarantees who must rise and who must fall? For ages uncounted, power in the 9 realms was simple because it was inevitable. Gods ruled because prophecy said they would. Monsters waited because prophecy promised their moment. Every hierarchy rested not on choice, but on certainty. And then certainty broke. Ragnarok was meant to erase everything. In the old telling, gods died, the world burned, and a new order rose cleanly from the ashes. No negotiations. No reforms. Fate did the work. But this time, the slate is not wiped. The fire still scorches the realms. The dead still lie uncounted. Yet the rulers of the old world remain standing, and that survival changes everything. Odin survives what was meant to end him. No longer a martyr crowned by destiny, he stands as a living ruler burdened with something far heavier than sacrifice, responsibility. His authority once came from knowing his death was necessary. Now, every order he gives must be justified, argued, defended. Thor still wields unmatched strength. Mjolnir still answers his call. But without a foretold end, his power feels unfinished. He was shaped to die gloriously, not to rule carefully. In a world without destiny, brute force loses clarity. And watching from the fractures between realms is Loki. He was meant to be the catalyst of doom, the father of monsters who unmade the gods. Now he sees something far more interesting, chaos born not from destruction, but hesitation. His role blurs. Not destroyer. Not ally. Something more dangerous, a broker of instability. For Tyr, the shift cuts deepest. He gave his hand to bind Fenrir, believing his sacrifice would be answered by fate itself. But vengeance never came. Fulfillment never arrived. Duty without conclusion leaves a wound deeper than any bite. Tyr begins to question whether justice still exists when destiny refuses to finish its sentence. Across Asgard, obedience falters. Councils form where commands once sufficed. Gods debate borders once enforced by fear of prophecy alone. Giants probe the edges of the realms, no longer certain which lines still matter. Power is no longer inherited from the future, it must be negotiated in the present. New alliances emerge, not by fate, but by belief. Some gods cling to preservation. They argue the old order must be enforced manually if destiny will not do it. Others see opportunity. If fate can be broken once, it can be rewritten entirely. The 9 realms split along a new axis, control versus adaptation. Warriors lose influence without promised sacrifice. Enforcers wait for battles that may never come. In their place rise strategists, negotiators, visionaries, those who can imagine a future that isn't already written. And above them all stands Odin, facing a truth no god was meant to confront. Without fate, the gods must now govern like mortals. Power must be earned. Order must be chosen. So Odin speaks a decree that shakes the roots of Yggdrasil itself. The prophecies of Ragnarok are no longer law. The future of the 9 realms will be decided by the gods themselves. With fate dethroned, the greatest threat to existence is no longer monsters or fire, but the choices of those who survived destiny. A world that was never meant to survive. What happens to resources, trade, and value in a world that was supposed to end, but didn't? Norse cosmology was never built for maintenance. It was built for cycles. Creation, struggle, destruction, then rebirth. Ragnarok was the release valve that made hoarding pointless and sacrifice meaningful. When the end failed to arrive, the 9 realms were left with a problem they had never prepared for: continuation. Asgard still stands. Scarred, cracked, and smoking, but standing. It was meant to burn to ash, not to budget for the next season. Midgard is damaged rather than renewed, fields are flooded, towns broken, yet the soil is not reborn. The great cycle stalls. No clean slate arrives to justify waste. This interruption reshapes everything. With fate dethroned in Chapter 3, Odin can no longer rule by prophecy. Governance replaces inevitability, and governance requires provisions. Armories give way to storehouses. War readiness yields to long-term provisioning. The gods begin counting, not boasting. Trade awakens between realms, not as tribute to destiny, but as necessity. Asgard shifts from forging doomsday weapons to securing food, timber, and repair. Midgard invests in rebuilding because collapse is no longer honorable, it is wasteful. Roads are cleared. Harbors restored. Ships once built to ferry the dead now carry grain, tools, and workers between worlds. And in the deep places, power changes hands. The dwarves and Svartalfar, masters of forging and craft, rise sharply in influence. Their knowledge was once prized for apocalyptic artifacts, now it is indispensable for infrastructure. Enchanted metals are rationed, not hurled into final battles. You and its kin are measured, reforged, repaired. The economy of miracles becomes an economy of maintenance. Cause and effect is unforgiving. Without inevitable destruction, hoarding loses meaning because nothing is reset. Without foretold rebirth, waste becomes dangerous because losses accumulate. Without Ragnarok, planning replaces glory. Food, labor, and craft gain value over prophecy and fame. Artisans, builders, healers, and farmers rise in status. Warriors and berserkers, once central to meaning, find themselves idle, their skills ill-suited to a world that must endure. Realms that thrived on chaos and plunder begin to stagnate, without the promise of renewal, their excesses rot them from within. In the old myth, wealth burned with the world. In this world, wealth must last. Stability arrives, and with it, limits the gods never faced before. Forests thin. Mines deepen. Seas are fished without the promise of replenishment. Every realm learns the same hard lesson at different speeds: survival is not infinite. The paradox tightens its grip. A world spared from annihilation gains time, but loses forgiveness. Every choice now echoes. Every resource spent is gone for good. The gods discover that immortality does not mean abundance, it means accounting. And so the most unsettling outcome reveals itself. The greatest threat to the 9 realms is no longer fire, monsters, or fate, but depletion. A slow exhaustion of worlds that were never meant to last forever. Innovation without an ending. What kind of progress emerges when the world is no longer destined to end? For ages, innovation in the 9 realms had a purpose that required no patience. Weapons were forged to kill gods. Spells were crafted to burn alongside the world. Knowledge was meant to blaze brightly, and then vanish with Ragnarok. Why preserve what fate promised to erase? But when the end failed to arrive, creation was forced to change its direction. After fate broke in Chapter 3 and scarcity revealed itself in Chapter 4, innovation faced a new demand: endurance. The realms were no longer sprinting toward a final war. They were settling into something far more difficult: continuation. In Svartalfheim, the forges did not fall silent. They transformed. Dwarven craft turned away from god-killing blades and toward structures meant to last, bridges that resisted realm shift tremors, tools that could be reforged endlessly, alloys designed not for power, but for longevity. Legendary weapons became heirlooms, maintained rather than multiplied. Runic magic followed the same path. Once, runes amplified destruction, storms, fire, collapse. Now they are rewritten to stabilize ley lines, reinforce the roots of Yggdrasil, and prevent realms from drifting into decay. Preservation replaces escalation. Balance replaces domination. Healing arts advance faster than any battlefield enchantment ever did. Without guaranteed rebirth, death becomes expensive. Spells that once slowed wounds now regenerate organs. Longevity charms extend mortal lives not as blessings, but as investments. Knowledge is passed down instead of burned away. Even the gods begin to value repair over replacement. This shift reshapes daily life. Cities are no longer defended by armies alone, but by layered wards, quiet, overlapping protections that deter rather than destroy. Roads between realms become reliable. Messages travel regularly, not as omens of doom, but as coordination. Industry prizes durability. Glory fades, usefulness endures. Warfare changes its nature. Apocalyptic clashes grow rare. Why annihilate what cannot be renewed? Conflicts become defensive: attrition, fortification, deterrence. Victory is measured not by obliteration, but by what survives afterward. Walls matter more than swords. Shields more than hammers. The cause and effect is relentless. Without a foretold end, reckless shortcuts become dangerous. Without guaranteed rebirth, every failure carries permanent cost. Without Ragnarok, innovation must answer to tomorrow. And yet, tension grows beneath the progress. Ambition does not vanish, but it is restrained. Every new spell is tested for unintended damage. Every invention is weighed against what it might break forever. The fear of permanent harm becomes the invisible governor of creativity. The 9 realms grow more sophisticated in ways they never were before. Preservation magic reaches heights unimagined. Stability becomes a science. Survival becomes an art. But something else quietly disappears. The willingness to create anything truly world-shattering. By escaping the end, the realms gain time and lose the hunger for absolutes. They become masters of keeping the world alive and strangers to the kind of creation that once reshaped it. And in that paradox, culture itself begins to change in ways no forge or rune can fully control. Culture after the end that never came. What kind of stories does a world tell when the ending is no longer guaranteed? For as long as memory reached, the 9 realms told their stories forward, toward fire, collapse, and glorious death. Sagas raced toward Ragnarok as if the ending gave meaning to every beginning. To live well was to die well. To matter was to fall at the right moment. Then the end failed to arrive. After fate cracked in Chapter 3, after survival replaced sacrifice in Chapters 4 and 5, culture began to change in ways no decree could command. Not loudly. Not all at once. But inevitably. The sagas shifted first. Bards stopped rushing toward final battles. New stories lingered on what happened after a war that did not cleanse the world. Heroes did not seek death, they sought restraint. Victory was measured by what endured, the hall rebuilt, the bridge repaired, the feud settled without blood. Endurance became the highest praise. Poetry followed. Verses once crowded with fire and doom softened into memory and consequence. Skalds wrote of seasons returning, of names carried forward, of mistakes that could no longer be burned away by prophecy. Glory gave ground to accountability. Music and ritual changed their rhythm. Where once drums beat for final marches, they now marked cycles, harvests, tides, years survived. Ceremonies honored balance over triumph. The great fires of prophecy dimmed into hearths meant to last the winter. Celebration became quieter, steadier, communal. Language itself began to bend. Metaphors of inevitable destruction faded. Words for patience, maintenance, and legacy multiplied. Prophecy, once the spine of meaning, slowly gave way to planning. People spoke less of what must happen and more of what should be tended. The future became a space to manage, not a blaze to await. Everyday culture reflected the turn. Festivals celebrated survival rather than victory. Craftsmen and healers were honored alongside warriors, often above them. Children were taught not how to die bravely, but how to live carefully. The skills passed down were no longer about last stands, but long stewardship. This was a sharp break from the old worldview. There was no longer a romantic obsession with Ragnarok. No certainty that destruction itself was meaningful. Fewer songs about gods falling, more about worlds holding together, about Yggdrasil being tended root by root rather than awaiting collapse. Yet a paradox emerged. Without a destined end, stories lost dramatic finality. Heroism became quieter, slower, less spectacular. There were fewer moments that felt decisive, no single strike that could define a life forever. Identity struggled to adjust. Gods and mortals alike had to redefine worth without sacrifice. Greatness was no longer measured by what one destroyed, but by what one preserved. To matter was not to fall at the right time, but to remain when it would have been easier to burn. Some found this grounding. Others found it unsettling. Because a culture built on survival teaches caution well, but courage differently. And so a new question took hold, whispered more than sung. If culture no longer prepares people for the end, does it teach them how to truly live? Or merely how to avoid losing what they already have? Faith after fate failed. What happens to faith when prophecy fails and destiny does not arrive? For countless ages, belief in the 9 realms rested on certainty. The Norns did not suggest the future, they declared it. Ragnarok was not a warning or a possibility, it was a conclusion. Gods and mortals lived inside a story whose ending was already known. Then the ending hesitated. When Fenrir did not break his chains, prophecy did not shatter all at once. It softened, bent, became questionable. Fate no longer felt absolute, it felt conditional. And that single shift unsettled every belief built upon inevitability. This change did not happen in isolation. After power lost its prophetic mandate in Chapter 3, after survival replaced sacrifice in Chapter 4, after innovation turned toward endurance in Chapter 5, and culture learned to live without a final act in Chapter 6, faith was forced to follow the same path. Certainty became difficult to defend. New movements emerged quietly. Some traditions began teaching fate as guidance rather than command, a current to read, not a chain to obey. Ragnarok, they argued, was never a fixed endpoint, but a map of consequences. A warning written in symbols, not a schedule carved in stone. Reformist cults went further. They questioned whether the gods themselves had misunderstood destiny. Perhaps the visions of the Norns were never promises, only probabilities. Perhaps Fenrir's binding was not defiance of fate, but its fulfillment in a form no one expected. Other schools of thought rejected inevitability entirely. They taught that choice had replaced fate. That the future was now open, and therefore dangerous. In these circles, Ragnarok was reinterpreted not as an end, but as a lesson in what happens when fear governs action. But belief did not move in one direction. Some clung harder to prophecy than ever before. They waited. Watched. Counted signs. Fenrir would break free eventually, they insisted. Fate delayed was not fate denied. For them, patience became devotion. Tension grew between preservationists and revisionists. Former prophets became interpreters, explaining visions as ranges rather than certainties. Priests shifted their teachings, from foretelling doom to teaching responsibility. Rituals lost their urgency. Instead of preparing for the end, they asked how to live well if the end never came. Temples changed. The thunderous halls of prophecy grew quiet. In their place rose spaces for reflection. Debate replaced declaration. Doubt, once dangerous, became sacred. To question was no longer betrayal, but honesty. Faith reshaped daily life and politics. Morality focused less on fulfilling destiny and more on weighing consequence. Leadership justified itself through wisdom and foresight, not divine prediction. Decisions mattered more, because no prophecy stood ready to absorb the blame. Yet beneath this transformation lay a deeper tension. Belief without certainty is more truthful, but far more fragile. Without fate to carry the weight, every choice becomes heavier. Every failure feels personal. Freedom expands, but so does responsibility. And so a final, unsettling question spreads through the 9 realms, whispered by gods and mortals alike. If fate no longer decides the future, does that make the world freer? Or unbearably heavier? For those who must now choose everything themselves. Living without an ending. What does a normal day look like when the world was supposed to end, but didn't? It begins quietly. The sun still rises over the branches of Yggdrasil. Winds move through realms that once waited to burn. There are no horns calling warriors to their final glory, only the sounds of work beginning again. Life, it turns out, is heavier than prophecy. With fate no longer carrying the future on its back, ordinary days take on a different shape. Professions that once stood in the shadow of war now form the backbone of society. Builders, wardsmiths, rune keepers, healers, farmers, bridge tenders, those who maintain rather than destroy, become essential. Their work isn't heroic in the old sense, but without it, nothing holds. Education changes early. Children are no longer taught how to die bravely. They are taught how to choose carefully. Lessons focus on consequence, memory, and long horizons. A mistake is no longer something Ragnarok will erase. It lingers. It teaches. Responsibility replaces destiny as the core lesson of growing up. Families organize around continuity. Homes stretch across generations. Elders are valued not for tales of battle, but for judgment earned through survival. Stories passed down are not about final stands, but about repairs made just in time, feuds settled slowly, winters endured because someone planned ahead. Obligation binds people tighter than prophecy ever did. Social status works differently now. There are fewer sudden rises, fewer catastrophic falls. Without heroic deaths to sanctify a life, reputation is earned through consistency. Showing up. Holding ground. Keeping promises over decades. In a world without resets, names carry longer shadows. Communities reflect this shift. Warrior identity fades, not erased, but reframed. Strength still matters, but restraint matters more. Intergenerational households become common, not from nostalgia, but necessity. Trust is built through repetition. Accountability replaces glory as social currency. Emotionally, the world settles into a narrower band. There are fewer extremes of despair and triumph. Fewer moments that feel final. In their place come quiet pride, patience, and a persistent pressure, the knowledge that life must be carried forward deliberately. Safety increases. So does weight. The cause and effect is relentless. Without destiny to blame, mistakes linger. Without apocalypse to erase them, consequences accumulate. Without an ending, every choice matters longer than comfort allows. This is the sharpest break from the old myth. There is no expectation of dying gloriously. No permission to burn bright and vanish. Living well becomes harder than dying bravely ever was. And beneath the calm, a quiet tension grows. When everyone is responsible for their choices, judgment becomes slower, deeper, and harder to escape. Redemption takes time. Forgiveness requires memory. There is no final fire to cleanse reputations. Most adapt. They build steadier lives. Longer lives. More careful lives. But not everyone finds peace in endurance. Some still feel the pull of an ending, of a moment that would simplify everything, gather meaning into flame, and release the weight of consequence all at once. Which leaves a question lingering at the edge of this quieter world. If life becomes steadier, longer, and more careful, what happens to those who still long for an ending? The world that never ended. What kind of world exists centuries after an apocalypse that never arrived? It is not brighter. It is not darker. It is older than it was ever meant to be. The 9 realms were supposed to be reborn through fire, a clean ending that made room for a clean beginning. Instead, they continued forward through accumulation, repair, and restraint. Nothing was wiped away. Nothing was reset. History didn't restart. It stacked. Asgard no longer feels like a throne room built for prophecy. It has become a center of governance and preservation, less a shining fortress of inevitability, more an administrative heart that keeps the realms stitched together. Halls once filled with foretellings are now filled with records. Temples are repurposed as archives and chambers of debate. The gods speak less in declarations and more in policies, because the future isn't written anymore, it is managed. Midgard stabilizes into layered societies built on continuity rather than cycles of collapse. Towns grow into cities not by dramatic rebirth, but by gradual thickening, streets laid over older streets, foundations reinforced instead of abandoned. Markets reflect long memory. Families trace lineages not through heroic deaths, but through decades of shared obligation. Life is steadier, but every mistake is also older. Every consequence lasts. Even the realms that once existed mainly as threats begin to integrate, not by conquest, but by dependency. Treaties replace terror. Trade replaces prophecy. Svartalfheim becomes indispensable as the engine of repair, forging hinges, braces, ward anchors, and tools meant to survive centuries. Jotunheim shifts from a distant enemy to a tense neighbor, still dangerous, still proud, but now tied into the same networks of exchange and containment. Fear does not vanish, it becomes regulated. Cause and effect holds everything together. When fate-based authority collapsed, politics reorganized into councils and long-lived institutions. Rulers became fewer and less heroic. Leadership is defined by maintenance and foresight rather than destiny or conquest. Decisions are measured in decades, sometimes centuries, because nothing will burn cleanly enough to erase a mistake. Economies built for survival reshape labor and design. The most honored work is not the killing blow, but the steady hand: builders, healers, wardsmiths, bridge tenders. Cities are designed around longevity: reinforced roads, layered wards, storehouses, archives. Infrastructure isn't replaced by rebirth, it is repaired again and again, like a world refusing to let go of itself. Technology, too, reflects the same philosophy: durability over brilliance. Communication between realms becomes reliable and formal, tied to protocols and protections. Systems are built not to dazzle, but to endure. The result is a civilization that feels stable, synchronized, and astonishingly resilient. And yet, the world carries a subtle weight. It is heavier with memory. Quieter without the promise of a cleansing end. Full of places that should have been ashes, now simply older. The original myth expected a dramatic conclusion. Instead, this reality becomes a long continuation, one that must solve problems without the mercy of destruction. Beneath the stability, a quiet unease grows. Because a civilization built to survive indefinitely may not know how to transform without breaking. It can preserve. It can contain. It can endure. But it cannot reset. And slowly, the greatest danger reveals itself: not extinction, not Ragnarok, but exhaustion. An ordinary life after Ragnarok that never came. What does it mean to live an ordinary life in a world that was never reborn? In 2025, it means waking up to a morning that feels familiar, not urgent. The day begins with small rituals that don't exist to prepare for disaster, but to maintain continuity. A hearth checked. A ward stone at the doorway touched without thinking. The same gestures taught by parents, who learned them from theirs. The world doesn't feel like it's ending. It feels like it's lasting. They step outside into streets that carry layers of time. Stone worn smooth by centuries of feet. Timber beams replaced one by one, never all at once. Buildings aren't torn down for something new, they're repaired into something older. The air smells of rain and iron and bread. The sounds are steady: carts, tools, voices that don't shout much anymore. Work is not a ladder. It is a duty. They are not a hero, not a seer, not someone the sagas will remember. They are a maintainer, bridge tender, wardsmith as assistant, archive clerk, field steward. The job is chosen for consistency rather than ambition. In a world without resets, the most valuable skill is not brilliance. It's reliability. Education shaped this early. Children learn history the way others learn weather, not as stories of glory, but as lessons in consequence. They memorize past repairs, past mistakes, past compromises that kept the realms holding. Foresight is praised more than courage. Restraint more than speed. Nobody asks what destiny calls you to. They ask what you can carry for a long time. Family life follows the same pattern. Homes are close, intergenerational. Elders are not distant, they are part of the structure. Their memories matter because nothing has been burned cleanly away. Stories are not about how the world ended, but about how it almost did, and what it cost to keep it from collapsing afterward. Expectations are quiet but heavy: contribute, endure, don't waste what cannot be replaced. Technology supports life without dazzling it. Tools are worn, trusted, passed down. A hammer with a handle smoothed by 3 generations. A rune-carved brace that's been reforged instead of discarded. Systems change slowly, rarely. Communication is steady and formal, messages carried through warded routes, delivered with care, believed because trust is built over decades. Every choice reflects the culture and economy of endurance. Travel is planned rarely and carefully, not because roads are impossible, but because leaving your role leaves a gap. Success isn't measured by recognition, it's measured by contribution. By what still stands when you're done. Evenings feel safe, predictable, and heavy. Because safety here comes with pressure. Nothing erases mistakes. Nothing rewrites consequences. In this world, you don't burn a life down and start again. You live inside what you've built and what you've damaged. Before sleep, they do the same final habit every night, checking the ward stone, ensuring the latch is set, making tomorrow easier for the people who will wake after them. Then, in the quiet dark, a thought arrives, small, almost forbidden in its softness. A curiosity about a world that was supposed to end. And never did. Technology in a world that never ended. What kind of technology does a civilization build when the apocalypse never arrives, and renewal never comes? In the old stories, invention raced toward the end. Weapons were forged to matter once. Spells were designed to burn bright and vanish. When Ragnarok failed to arrive, that urgency evaporated, and with it, an entire philosophy of progress. This world did not reset. So its technology learned how to remain. Because Fenrir never broke his chains, the gods never fell. There was no collapse to justify recklessness, no rebirth to excuse waste. Innovation could not gamble on oblivion. Every tool had to live alongside what came before, and survive the consequences of being used. Some systems still exist, but they evolve differently. Infrastructure is built for centuries, not lifetimes. Roads are layered, not replaced. Bridges are designed to flex and be repaired, not to be torn down for something faster. Architecture accepts decay as a partner, materials are chosen for how gracefully they age. Cities grow inward, reinforcing bones laid long ago. Energy follows the same ethic. There is no obsession with maximum output, only with steadiness. Power systems are distributed, redundant, and deliberately modest. When a world isn't meant to end, the greatest failure is interruption. Maintenance becomes the highest engineering art. Communication advances steadily, but without spectacle. Messages travel slower than in our world, and are trusted more. Protocols matter. Archives matter. Records are sacred because nothing will erase them. The past is not something to overwrite, it is something to carry. Other technologies surge quietly over centuries. Medicine favors prevention and longevity over radical intervention. Knowledge is inherited, refined, and layered. Healers build lineages of practice rather than chasing miracle cures. Lives extend, not dramatically, but reliably, because survival is an investment, not a victory lap. Transportation values durability over speed. Vehicles are heavy, reparable, and familiar. Travel exists, but it is planned, because moving a person means shifting responsibility, not just distance. And then there are the technologies that never appear. There are no last resort annihilation devices. No systems built to end wars forever, because the world itself is not meant to end. There is no obsession with disruption, no cult of constant reinvention. Nothing is designed to erase the past, only to preserve it. Warfare reflects this restraint. Conflict still exists, but it is constrained, ritualized, and rare. Defensive systems dominate. The goal is deterrence, not devastation. When destruction is permanent, even victory must be measured carefully. Compared to our world, progress here feels quieter. There are fewer breakthroughs that shock the realms. No sudden leaps that redefine everything overnight. Instead, there is deep refinement, tools perfected through centuries of use, errors corrected patiently, wisdom accumulated rather than discarded. Cause and effect governs all of it. Without Ragnarok, there is no technological desperation. Without prophecy fulfilled, innovation loses urgency. Without rebirth, every invention must coexist with its ancestors. An uncomfortable truth emerges with time. This world's technology is, in many ways, wiser than ours. It respects limits. It plans for repair. It understands that endurance is a feature, not a flaw. And yet it lacks something too. The explosive power. The speed. The reach we associate with modernity. Which leaves a question lingering in the forges, the archives, and the long-lived cities. If technology no longer prepares for the end of the world, is it truly advancing? Or simply learning how to endure? Forever? The world that never ended. The most surprising consequence of this altered myth was not a world saved. And it was not a world destroyed. It was a world that never learned how to end, and therefore never truly learned how to begin again. When Fenrir remained bound, everything else followed. Ragnarok did not ignite. The gods did not fall. Fire did not cleanse the realms, and the sea did not swallow history whole. The great cycle, destruction followed by rebirth, froze in place. Civilization did not reset. It aged. What began as restraint became permanence. What felt like mercy slowly became inertia. The 9 realms continued forward not through renewal, but through accumulation, layer upon layer of repair, memory, and consequence. A world meant to be reborn through fire instead learned how to endure through maintenance. One unbroken chain reshaped fate itself. Without catastrophe, order survived. Without collapse, systems stabilized. Without an ending, progress lost its urgency. Survival became the highest value, and survival favors caution over transformation. This world is not better than the myth we know. And it is not worse. It is heavier. Slower. Older. A civilization that mastered continuity, but never rediscovered reinvention. There were fewer apocalypses. Fewer heroic sacrifices. Fewer legends born in flame. Gods no longer ruled by prophecy, but by preservation. Temples became archives. Thrones became offices. Power shifted from destiny to maintenance. But there were also fewer rebirths. Fewer clean slates. Fewer moments when meaning could be rewritten from ash. Memory outweighed hope. Preservation replaced destiny. The future became something to manage, not to imagine. Even Yggdrasil, once a symbol of cosmic cycles, felt rooted in stillness rather than renewal. And slowly, quietly, the final realization took shape. Fenrir's chains did not save the world from destruction. They saved it from change. By preventing the end, the realms escaped annihilation, but also escaped transformation. They learned how to persist indefinitely, yet lost the courage to let go. In avoiding the fire, they avoided the freedom that comes after it. Which leaves a question that no prophecy can answer, and no God can settle for you. If the end of the world never arrives, does humanity truly live? Or does it merely persist? Was Fenrir's restraint mercy? Or a curse? Is an eternal world wiser? Or simply afraid to release what it has been holding for too long? There is no single answer. And perhaps there never was. If this story made you pause, question, or disagree, share your interpretation in the comments. Alternate history isn't about proving what should have happened, it's about revealing how fragile reality can be, and how powerful the things are that never occur. Like the video. Subscribe to the channel. And follow for more journeys into alternate myth and history, where sometimes the greatest change is not what happens, but what never does. And so this version of history comes to a pause, not an ending, just a breath between possibilities. Every what if we explore opens another path, another world shaped by a single change. If this story made you see the past differently, imagine what happens when we alter another moment. Stay with Slightly Another Story, because the next question might change everything again.